Thank you, Ms. Stein. I now recognize Ms. Pearlstein for 5 minutes to summarize her opening statement.
Thank you very much, Chairman Green, Ranking Member Thompson, members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to participate in the committee's consideration of whether constitutional grounds exist to impeach Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas. I've been a professor of constitutional law for more than a decade, director of 2 different academic centers focused on the study of constitutional democracy. I've studied, written, and taught about the unique role impeachment plays in our system of government. As a mother and a former human rights lawyer, I couldn't take the subject matter in front of the committee today more seriously. My expertise, however, is in the field of constitutional law, not in immigration policy as such, and my testimony solely in my personal capacity is thus limited to questions of constitutional authority that are relevant here. While my written statement goes into greater detail, in these few minutes I'd like to highlight just 2 points. First, impeachment is a narrow remedy for a specific kind of misconduct limited by the Constitution to addressing offenses against our system of government that cannot be solved through ordinary channels of redress. Second, no branch of government has more power under our Constitution to address matters of border security than Congress. Although the framers of the U.S. Constitution were convinced that impeachment would have to be retained from the British regime they had just overthrown as a remedy against the most egregious offenses of public officers, they were determined to limit the scope of the power to ensure it remained consistent with the new design of our constitutional democracy. Central to our system is this principle of separation of powers. Each branch of government remains independent, with none empowered to fully control the members of the others. Because impeachment was a potentially dangerous exception to that overriding principle, the framers significantly narrowed the scope of the impeachment power as it existed under the law of the king. Above all, the framers significantly narrowed the grounds for which officials could be impeached. And as now, treason and bribery were recognized as the most serious offenses against a system of government in which the American people were asked to entrust elected leaders with acting in their interest. Treason was a betrayal of the interests of the American people in favor of the interests of a foreign enemy. Bribery involved a public official placing his own interests in personal power and enrichment above the interests of the public. By labeling the other category, other high crimes and misdemeanors, the framers signaled that they meant to include only those offenses that posed a similarly severe threat, not to a particular area of public policy, but to the very system of government that depends on officials acting in good faith on behalf of the people who place them in office. Policy differences could be addressed through elections. Impeachment was to be, and largely has been, a last-ditch mechanism to address offenses against constitutional democracy by a single individual that can't be adequately addressed through ordinary channels of government. Second point, the first and most important remedy the Constitution provides to address perceived failings of the president and the executive branch remains the separation of powers, including Congress's authority to effect policy change itself. When it comes to immigration in particular, the Supreme Court has long described congressional power in the field as plenary. Article 1 of the Constitution grants Congress the power to set the terms and conditions by which a foreign national may become a U.S. citizen, sweeping authorities to provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States, the power to make all laws necessary and proper for carrying out these duties. And Article 1, Section 9 gives Congress the exclusive power over how the U.S. government allocates its resources. These vast powers, which the Constitution sets out in its very first article, remain among our democracy's most fundamental checks on the exercise of executive power. Despite these vast reserves of constitutional authority, a spike in partisan polarization in recent decades, a refusal to work across partisan lines to solve common problems, has meant the power to address pressing national problems has gone unused. Nowhere has this effect been more apparent than in Congress's failure to develop national policy on immigration. Despite all that has changed, the last significant piece of comprehensive immigration legislation to pass Congress with bipartisan support was in 1986. The action under consideration here, impeachment, isn't a tool of policy change, particularly the impeachment of a single cabinet official who can be replaced by another official given precisely the same role, will have no effect on the heartbreaking problems we have heard described. Without taking a position on the wisdom of any particular bill now under consideration, I understand that multiple pieces of bipartisan legislation are today pending in the House very active negotiations underway in the Senate. The framers of the Constitution well understood the acute difficulty of embracing compromise with their domestic political opponents, or for the purpose of actually addressing the needs and easing the pain of the people who live in this country. The framers of the Constitution thought that no one in government could do more to make a real difference than you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pearlstein. Members will be recognized by order of seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Ms. Pearlstein, in 2019 on a New York Public Radio podcast, you were asked what you took away from a congressional hearing on impeachment standards. Your response was as follows.
So this is an exchange that came out of and really belonged in the panel in which the constitutional law professors were appearing. And there, the professors were reasonably uniform, right, in recognizing that it doesn't have to be a crime, that is to say an impeachable offense, doesn't have to be a crime as currently embodied in the federal criminal code as enacted by Congress. The existing criminal laws didn't exist when the framers wrote the Constitution, and indeed, crimes as such weren't what the framers had in mind when they put impeachment into the Constitution. What they were thinking about with the impeachment remedy were serious offenses against the public trust. That is, certain things that only the president and other senior officials could do that abused their authority. In other words, the idea of abuse of power is sort of the death.
You still stand by those words? Yes, just a yes or no quick question.
It is absolutely the case. The Congress doesn't have to show a violation of Title 18 of the U.S. Code. It has to show that there was a high crime or misdemeanor.
Reclaiming my time, I think the words that are very interesting to me is serious offenses against the public trust. Ms. Nobles, Ms. Dunn, do you think that our open border policies, which have allowed fentanyl to pour into this country, 1.8 million gotaways, unknown gotaways, is an offense against the public trust of this country?
Yes, definitely.
Ms. Dunn? Yes. Ms. Nobles, the committee has been focused. Well, first, before I ask your question, one of the things that was very interesting in your opening statement, Ms. Pearlstein, was about the power of separation, the separation of powers. And you talk about Congress having the remedy to make laws to fix the immigration issue and the border issue. But see, we passed a law that says shall detain. Mr. Mayorkas has basically completely reversed that. So you're right, we could pass more laws. In fact, we tried. We passed H.R. 2, but it won't pass the Senate because they refused to take it up. But yes, we have the power to pass more laws. They're not even following the laws that are already written. And that, from my standpoint, is basically a refusal to understand the separation of powers, that we write the laws and they enforce them. But the Secretary doesn't seem to care about that, nor does he seem to care about the 4 court orders, which have told him he's doing that and said cease and desist with these policies that are absolutely subverting the law, and he refused to follow those court orders. Ms. Nobles, the committee has been focused on the Biden administration's refusal to secure our southwest border and vet alien arrivals. A report from the House Judiciary Committee pointed out multiple vetting failures with your daughter's killer. Its report shows that your daughter's murderer was arrested for association with the MS-13 well before he came to the United States, something the United States officials verified easily after the murder occurred. The report also noted that the alien was released after he was arrested for murder. Do you think that Secretary Mayorkas has done an adequate job of vetting illegal aliens coming across our southern border?
No. And may I say that it took the local detectives to find out that he was an MS-13 gang member. Homeland Security and then Department of Health and Human Services did not know that until after he killed my daughter. And then they tried to write it in there after the fact, but it was already let out that they failed to know that he was an MS-13 gang member.
Ms. Dunn, do you believe Secretary Mayorkas genuinely cares about the well-being and safety of U.S. citizens like your daughter, considering that his actions are directly responsible for aggravating and fueling the ongoing fentanyl crisis?
Absolutely not.
Thank you. I yield. I now recognize the ranking member for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much. Let me say from the outset, every opportunity to provide resources for the Department of Homeland Security, Democrats on this committee have always given them what they've asked. The majority of Republicans on this committee, they've not given them resources. So when we interview people in the department, the number one issue that comes up is we need more resources, technology, sometimes manpower, sometimes just the ability to interdict. And that is what we've tried to provide on a regular basis. And I encourage my colleagues that when the next opportunity comes to fund the department, let's listen to the men and women who work in the department who say they need the resources, and let's give it to them. Professor Pearlstein, last week, you joined 24 of the country's most knowledgeable constitutional lawyers on a bipartisan letter to Speaker Johnson and Chairman Green explaining that the Republican case against Secretary Mayorkas is unjustified as a matter of constitutional law. Can you explain in simple terms why you and your colleagues concluded that impeaching the Secretary is unjustified under the Constitution?
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Yes. The term high crimes and misdemeanors, which is what's at issue here, is a limited term of art. It includes only those offenses against the system of government, not ordinary crimes, offenses against the structure of government comparable to treason and bribery, offenses that interfere in the way the government works. The allegations that have been set forth here, which are very serious, are profound complaints about the policies that the current secretary has pursued. They're policies that the secretary has pursued under the current president of the United States, who appointed the secretary and was elected to pursue those policies. Policy differences, and I agree with my colleague at the last hearing, no matter how profound, are exactly not what impeachment was meant to be for. The framers were very worried that impeachment would become something like a tool of the parliamentary system, so that Congress could, in essence, hold the president and the president's administration on a leash. The framers wanted each branch to remain independent, to make their own policy judgments, so that their ambition could counteract ambition, and they would fight each other on democratic terms over what the right answer was.
Thank you very much. I also want to talk to you about how Republicans and Democrats on this committee can work together to strengthen border security and address the opioid crisis. Democrats agree about the need for action to help families like those on our panel today and prevent further tragedies. Professor, in your testimony, you say, and I quote, "The first and most important remedy the Constitution provides to address perceived failings of the president and executive branch remains the separation of powers, including Congress's constitutional authority to effect policy change itself." In other words, if the Congress doesn't like what an administration is doing, the Constitution gives its power to pass laws to direct a different course of action. Can you explain the power Congress has under the Constitution to effect change?
Thank you. Congress has the most power of any branch in the government to effect change. It has, under Article 1, the exclusive power to spend any money and allocate resources on behalf of the United States. It also has the other powers that I listed in my opening remarks. And critically, while it does have the power to pass laws, sweeping laws, it is also subject to the rule of the Supreme Court, which has, in the allegations at issue here, twice rejected the arguments that were noted by the chairman moments ago, that in fact there was a violation of law here. Those laws remain on the books, and Congress can do additional things, principally through funding, but not exclusively, to make them even stronger.
Thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the chairman of the Committee on Foreign Affairs, House Committee on Foreign Affairs, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. McCall.
Thank you, Mr.
5
Chairman.
minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for holding this powerful hearing. I was a federal prosecutor. I was Deputy Attorney General for the state of Texas for criminal justice. I worked with the victims of crime. That's what we do. And we talk a lot about facts and figures about the border, statistics. But your stories are the most powerful because they're real life stories about the impacts of this man's violation of the public trust. And I agree with your podcast that it doesn't have to be a federal statute because they didn't have a lot of federal statutes when the Founding Fathers were at the Constitutional Convention. In fact, the Supreme Court recently held that impeachment is a tool Congress can use to hold this secretary accountable. It's the legal justification. I believe he's violated his oath. He's violated the public trust. He's violated your daughters. I intend to personally uphold my oath to my country that I took in office. It's been a dereliction of duty of the grossest proportions I've seen in my 25 years of dealing with this border. Ms. Dunn, I couldn't agree. Fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction. I passed a bill out of my committee defining it as such. It comes from China, and they make it in Mexico, and they kill our children here, 200,000, more than Vietnam, World War II. My children have been to 6 funerals now. I've seen it personally. The destruction it does every 5 minutes. It is a fentanyl superhighway. And this border policy is personally responsible for it. He took an oath to defend and protect the Constitution and the American people, air, land, and sea from enemies, foreign and domestic. Ms. Dunn, do you believe he violated that oath?
Yes, sir. I flew from Arizona to meet him and face him and ask him why. And he's not here today. I did not know that until after I landed yesterday.
And he doesn't have the decency
No,
to even show up
that is correct.
and talk to you personally.
Today is my daughter's birthday. I would have much rather been home with my poor husband, grieving her. I didn't need to be here today. So whatever he's doing, I hope it's more important than that.
Let me say I'm sorry,
Thank you.
because apparently the secretary doesn't care to show up and say that to you.
No.
Do you know he's meeting with Mexican officials today?
Exactly.
How does that make you feel?
Oh, you have no idea how I feel.
I'll be meeting with Mexican officials later next week, and I'm going to have a different story for them. I'm going to have your story that I will take to them. Ms. Nobles, God, these gangbangers come in and they join trafficking organizations. They're being sent to families that don't exist because it's a trafficking organization in the United States. This one man who deserves impeachment has created a criminal enterprise in the United States of America. 8 million encounters. What are we going to do with all these millions of people with no legal status who can't get a real job? So what do? It's drugs, gangbanging, murder. Now, I've seen it in my career, and they're the worst. And it sickens me what happened to your daughter, and you must relive it in your head every single day, what she went through, what your poor daughter had to experience that day. Do you hold Mr. Mayorkas personally accountable for the death of your daughter?
Yes, I do.
I do too. And that's why he needs to be impeached. Do you hold him personally accountable for what he did? Do you hold him personally accountable for the policies he established, which violated the public trust and ended up in the death of your daughter.
Yes.
And yet he doesn't have the decency or the guts to show up to you today and say, I'm sorry. Did he?
No, he did not. I mean, she was killed 3 days after her 20th birthday. She spent 3 days being 20. And I sent her a message on her birthday on July 24th that I was proud of the woman that she was becoming and that I love her. And I didn't know that would be my last message to telling her that I love her. She even bought herself, I gave her the money to buy her a JoJo Suya cake, because that is who she loved. And she had autism, and she loved JoJo. And her life was brutally taken, and she had no idea what to expect that day when she went to bed after getting off the night shift of work and went to sleep in her own bed and had no idea what was going to happen on July 27th.
Let me just close by saying I have a daughter that is your daughter's age. She has a cat named Snickers. I know your daughter had a cat named Oreo. This is the personal side of this chaos created by this man. This is a personal life story of the cause and effect that has happened because of these failed policies on the border. It's destruction and it's death, and it has to stop. With that, I yield back.